Hey, welcome to my Mayday flight tutoring site, and welcome to my apartment in Berlin, where I'm spending the summer. I was working at Harv's Air as a flight instructor for 6 months, ending in June, and I came home to Berlin to be with my lovely wife, Susanna, and spend some time here and chill a little bit and relax, a little bit of traveling and thinking about the next steps, where I want to work next, and how I'd like to see my career progress. So I'm sort of working on that. And then I made this Mayday flight tutoring page, which the idea behind that is that I'd be available for one-on-one sessions, like say via Skype or Messenger or WhatsApp, um, for ground tutoring, and that would be for like theory, for the written, or prep for flight test, or just emergency counseling, or in terms of helping people get concepts straight. And there's all kinds of areas that I kind of, from my experience, have found that people like to get some help in. So sometimes it's hard to get a hold of your instructor, and the idea that I have is that I'd be available, whenever I can, in this medium, which I think is really cool. So I made the page and I shared it with like 12 or 13 of my former students and colleagues from Steinbach, and in the hopes that it would spread a little bit, and that I could keep my brain fresh by discussing, there's so many subjects and concepts in aviation. It's hard for any one person to retain it all if they're not, active with it. So when I'm not flying, um, I'd like to be able to keep my brain active and keep my skills up as an instructor. And I do love the ground portion of flying. I find it really interesting. I think that it's an important part of learning to fly. If you want to be a airline pilot or bush pilot or whatever, I think having a keen interest in understanding the concepts behind aviation in all subject matters, even from air law all the way through to airplane performance, or I think it's really important to keep up on that stuff. And so this is my way of keeping up on the stuff. I don't have any illusions of being an influencer or anything like that. There's some really great resources out there. Like back in the 80s, there was Rob Machado. He has some videos on YouTube, Rob Machado. And then there's these two young guys that do Bold Method out of the US, and they have very slick videos and presentations. And I'll often post them on my page because I find they're really well done and great for people who are having difficulties with some concepts. Good explanations. So I thought I'd also do some videos and just like talk the way I would talk to a student in my living room, which is kind of awesome. And I can think these concepts out loud. So I have on my laptop here a POH from the Cessna 152. And I thought, a good subject to talk about today would be something that I go over in the pre-flight for the flight test for rec students or PPL students, CPL students. And that's aircraft performance where it relates to the V speeds or various speeds of the Cessna 152 in my particular example, because that's the POH that I have up here. And it's one of the most common trainers still in the business. So the V speeds, during this pre-flight ground portion, which is usually longer than the actual flight test pre-flight ground portion, when we do the flight test ground portion, when we do the pre-flights, us instructors, the practice flight test, we tend to make the ground portions longer than you would experience during the flight test, simply because we want to make sure we cover as many bases as possible to prepare you for that. So one of the subjects I like talking about, and I'm kind of shocked sometimes that some people have difficulties with, is the V speeds of the airplane, their definitions, what exactly they are, and how they are affected, and how they affect the airplane. So I'll often start with the lowest speed, or the VSO, which is, of course, the stall speed, zero power, maximum flaps. Now, zero power is really important, and I'm surprised sometimes people don't quite have this concept, is that If I ask them, I'll say, what's VSO? And they say, well, it's 35 knots, indicated airspeed. And it's like, oh, cool. And how's the airplane configured for that? Well, it's full flaps, 30 degrees and a 152. Okay, cool. What other configuration concerns are there in there? And then sometimes most people will have to think about it for a moment, and some will tell me the correct answer, which is, well, that's zero power, idle power. Ah, okay. Well, that's really important. It's really important about the two V speeds, the VSO, which is 35 knots, indicated, zero power, full flaps, in the case of the 152, 30 degrees of flaps. And VS, which is 40 knots, which is no flaps, and also idle power or zero power. And the reason why it's important is it's a calibration thing. And I'm not talking about calibrated airspeed, because there are published CAS and IAS speeds in the POH. And just as an aside, the calibrated airspeed is different than the indicated airspeed because of the position of the pitot tube under the wing and how it relates to the various angles of attack of relative wind. And so, yes, there is a conversion chart between calibrated airspeed and indicated airspeed. But I don't want to get too deep into that. And I wouldn't even get super deep into that in the pre-flight. But certainly knowing what the indicated airspeeds and what the implications of them are is important. So that's why I'm doing this video. So yeah, so the reason, getting back to it, is why zero power is so important was, imagine being a test pilot and an engineering team, and you're designing an airplane, and you want to figure out what the stall speed of the airplane is. And as you all should know, and we all know, that the stall speed of an airplane is affected by the power. The more power, the lower the stall speed. So as you increase power, the stall speed decreases for a couple of reasons. Without getting into those, I'll just go back. So you can imagine that you have to have a set speed that you can publish in a book. Well, maybe airplane A's 2400 RPM is really 2330 of airplane B, because the engine is slightly different, or the setting on the controls, whatever, right? So you need to have a solid baseline. Of course, no power is easily reproducible. So that's why they published the stall speed in the VSO and the VS as zero power. It's also important when it comes to VSO is that we use VSO for specialty landings, the short field and soft field landings, and it's no power landing, all right, a power off approach. So yeah, no power is really important. And then we have other speeds and associated arcs, the white arc, which is the stall arc, the flaps arc. You have the green arc, which is the normal operating range, and then you have the yellow arc, which is the caution range. So starting with the white arc, it begins at VSO, which is 35 knots. That's the bottom of the white arc on the airspeed indicator, going up to 85 knots, which is VFE. The definition is the maximum flap extension speed. The green arc starts at the VS, which is 40 knots, and it goes all the way up to, I think, 111 knots, which is the VNO, and the maximum structural cruising speed. And in that range, with the standard power settings, you're going to be flying in that range most of the time, certainly right down to the bottom of the white arc. And then you have the caution range, which is the yellow arc, and that's from 111 up to VNE, the never exceed speed of 149. So all these speeds are related to each other, and their arcs overlap to a certain extent, or pick off where another one lets off. So the three arcs, the white arc, which is your flap extension range, you have your normal operating range, which is the green arc, and you have your caution range. And then it's followed by the little red blip at the top of the the airspeed indicator, and that's of course VNE, never exceed speed 149. So there's a quick sort of recap of the V speeds, and emphasizing the importance of the power setting when it comes to the stall speeds. Some other speeds that we have that are important to talk about are the maneuvering speeds. Now, I'm pretty sure that the cars require that you know the maneuvering speeds by heart, the VX, VY, VS, and VSO. So the maneuvering speeds are interesting, and they're confusing to a lot of students because they're related to the weight of the aircraft. And there's three published speeds. Now, of course, there's an infinite range in between each speed, but they publish three speeds because it has to do with the loading of the airplane and the stall speed. So the three speeds are maneuvering speed at maximum gross weight, which is 1,670 pounds for a Cessna 152. The speed is 104 knots. And then at 1,500 pounds, the speed is 98 knots indicated. And at 1,350 pounds, the speed is 93 knots. Now, what's up with this? Why? A lot of students wonder, well, I don't understand. Why do we have three speeds? And why does the speed get lower as the weight gets lower? I mean, geez, it's at 104 knots and now it's down to 93 and the airplane's later. I don't get this. Well, it's a really elegant answer. The answer is really elegant, actually. Remember back when I said that the stall speed of an airplane depended on its power setting. Well, the higher a power setting, the lower the stall speed. Right. Well, another thing that affects the stall speed of an airplane is the weight. All right. The heavier the weight, the heavier the weight, the higher the stall speed. Okay? The heavier the weight, the higher the stall speed. As the weight decreases, the stall speed decreases. Well, there's a correlation there because the maneuvering speed also decreases with weight. So that should be a clue. And the clue is this. The definition of maneuvering speed is the maximum speed at which full and abrupt control movement will not cause structural damage to the airplane. That would also include anything that drastically and quickly changes the angle of attack of the airplane, the relative wind. So that's what's going on there. Because as the weight of the airplane decreases, the stall speed actually decreases. So that means that at lower weights with maximum control movement, it would actually be a lower speed at which the airplane would stall first. Anything above that would cause structural damage, and that reason is that as the airplane weighs less, it is much easier to have an abrupt, equal and opposite force on the airframe. All right. In other words, there's less inertia. Right. So as the airspeed as the weight decreases, okay, the stall speed also decreases, all right, and the maneuvering speed decreases. Above those three published speeds, all right, if abrupt control movement could cause structural damage, which is a snaggable occurrence and should be entered into the journey log, and the airplane should be snagged and checked for structural damage, especially older airplanes. Now, it's not very often that people get themselves into this situation, but there's a reason it's there. All right? It would also be related to other things that could occur, like extreme shear events, like from thunderstorms. So staying below the maneuvering speeds, which is pretty easy to do in a 152, I mean, 105 knots indicated is kind of on the top range of normal cruising speeds. Just keep in mind, because the stall speed decreases with weight, so does the maneuvering speed. And all you have to remember, and it's true, is that if you fly above that speed at that particular weight, then you risk damaging the aircraft structure by maximum control movement or associated shear events, vertical or horizontal shear events of wind, relative wind. Now, talking about the takeoff speeds, we also talk about there's Vx and Vy, which should be memorized. The definition of Vx is the best angle of climb. And to elaborate on that, if I ask, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the airplane will climb the most height in the least amount of distance. Okay, so it's an obstacle clearance speed that we use in the short field takeoff. You rotate and let the airplane accelerate only to Vx. In this case, the 152 is 54, 55 knots, and that will give you the most height and least amount of forward space and allow you to clear an obstacle. Vy, which is used more commonly during takeoffs without obstacle clearance, 67 knots in the 152, will give you the most height in the least amount of time. So that's used for more standard departures. We have some other speeds that are also in other parts of the POH when it talks about, general operations or and that's like, takeoff ranges, like, 70 to 80, you'll see often. At landing ranges, 60 to 70, you'll see. But the actual V speeds, the published V speeds, are sort of like the flight tested speeds that are calibrated, are all in that one section of the POH. All right, and they're given to you an indicated airspeed, which is what you see on your airspeed indicator, and calibrated airspeed, which is based on the position of the pitot tube to the relative wind. So the calibrated and the indicated airspeeds are different. Of course, you see the indicated on the airspeed indicator, and you would convert to calibrated using the conversion chart in your POH. Other associated things that are related around that would be the flight load factor limits. So with the C-152, it's a utility category airplane. So you have maximum positive Gs and negative Gs with flaps up. So it's 4.4 to minus 1.76 Gs, flaps up. Anything beyond that could structurally damage the airplane. And then the flaps down, which is maximum G factor, would be 3.5 Gs. There is no negative G number for the flaps down. You shouldn't be doing negative Gs with the flaps down. So that's pretty much it. The last little thing is I'll often ask, talking about steep turns, is what's the ideal speed in a 152 to do a steep turn? A lot of people don't know it. It is published in the POH, it's 95 knots. And it's the same speed they use for Chandelles and Lazy 8s, which you can do in the utility category of that aircraft. So there you go. The V speeds, that's about the depth I would want to go into it during a pre-flight. And you can imagine, if you don't have those concepts down in your mind, you can take a fair amount of your time trying to sort that stuff out with an examiner or an instructor. So it's kind of nice to talk about that. And hopefully you find this helpful for you. And maybe spur you to look into it a little bit more, and like one of those great books like From the Ground Up, which is like an awesome book. It's all discussed in there. And Wolfgang Langewiesche in Stick and Rudder talks about that kind of stuff too. So there you go. That's the discussion of V-speeds for today from my lovely flat here in Berlin. And until next time, thanks for watching. See ya.